You're listening to You Would Think, the Philadelphia Flyers podcast. I'm your host, Kyle Collington. Joining me, as always, Kevin Durso. Kevin, how's it going today, buddy?
Going well. How are you doing?
It's going well. We're getting deeper into the playoffs. We got better hockey going on. We got a couple of good second-round series to talk about.
Better hockey some nights. We'll get there.
Better some than others. We'll get there. We got a couple of conference finals to preview, and we're starting with some Flyers news. But before we get to that, make sure you're following us on social media. We're at YWT Podcast. Kevin is at Kevin_Durso. If you're watching on YouTube, hit the like button. It helps us out. If you subscribe if you like what you see. So, okay, diving right in, we are starting with that Flyers news because on Wednesday, the Philadelphia Flyers named Rick Tocchet the 25th head coach in team history. Kevin, as somebody who, covers the team at a pretty close level, I know you mentioned you didn't make it to the press conference, but there's the fans and things, and we'll get into that. But I do want to start with kind of the media side. So, what changes about your job with Rick Tocchet in charge?
Well, press conferences get a little easier, I guess. That's a start. That's what changes about my job.
Well, I mean, isn't it easy when the coach is in and out in 30 seconds and doesn't really say anything? I mean, you get to go home early.
See, here's the thing. It depends because, we did this for almost 3 full seasons.
Yep.
After a certain point, you can kind of both read the game style that tells you what you're going to get and also sometimes know within one question what you're going to get. So sometimes you just know to lay out like there's nothing to say here today. We're done, and let it go. I don't think I'm going to have that experience with Rick Tocchet where it is, I imagine I'm going to have the same type of experience with Rick Tocchet that I do that I did, I should say, with, well, I'd like to say a little bit Brad Shaw, but like the first guy that actually really popped into my mind when I was thinking of this was Mike Yeo. Like I can sense a similar experience to Mike Yeo because Alain Vigneault had a little more of the Torts side. Like he wouldn't always give you a ton. He gave him way more than Torts always did, but like he knew how to play that game. And usually, like, it's funny, like every one of the guys who kind of knew how to play that game were the guys who rank in the top 10 in coaching wins all time. It's like, been here, done that. I don't need to, I'm not putting all my cards on the table kind of thing. And I really did, to be fair, I didn't really get a ton of the Peter Laviolette experience. My first real experience doing press conferences was Briere, who I think what's funny is I think Briere has evolved more into that guy over the years. Like in the beginning, I think he was an open book, which is kind of easy to do. It's kind of easy to be the open book going from assistant coach to head coach. And now with like a decade of head coaching experience, he's way more blunt about things. He's way more, he'll keep the cards close to the vest in certain situations, whatever it may be. So I've seen that evolution. Hackstall was just kind of an enigma sometimes. You could tell he didn't love that part of the job, knew it was part of it, but he just didn't have the personality to give you much. Like there's something about any, and it's truly I can say just about anybody, because I mean, now we're going on, specifically anyway, the last 2 permanent head coaches are coming from at least some form of a TV background. And I know Tortorella wasn't like in love with the TV side, but he did it. Yes. I think you're going to get that same, like, what did we say about Keith Jones when he switched from broadcasting to president of hockey operations? When you talk to him you're still going to get that little element of I was a broadcaster, so I'm good at this. And I think you're going to get the same. I think you're going to get the same thing with Rick Tocchet, that you're going to get this, he's got a way of being able to explain himself that some other people just don't, because it's just coach speak to the rest of them. And I think he can break things down in a little bit more detail. I always liked him on the TNT panel. I think he was a good addition to that. He played off of Biz really well on those 2, especially with the whiteboard type stuff that played off really well. So you see those elements of a coach in there. What I would rather do in this case is shift from how my job changes with Tocchet as the head coach and kind of go into some of the pieces of how we got here with kind of figuring out that this was where it was going to go. Because I'm going back to the TNT thing for a second, because Rick Tocchet was a guest analyst on the panel the weekend before. And didn't it seem like, if you saw the very end as they kind of got ready to sign off, and that they kind of expressed, it was nice having you back, but and there was that finality to it, like, yeah, you're not going to be back because you're going to get a job. And and it's that kind of thing. I did think it was funny either the night of or the day after the hiring was made official, TNT did a whole thing about, because Jonesy also got essentially hired by the Flyers, even though he was already technically working for them in a different capacity. He got hired as the president of hockey ops there, and there was a lot of irony to, okay, so what's next? Someone's going to own the team from the panel, and the irony of it was that they all shifted their eyes to Henrik Lundqvist, who, in theory, owned the Flyers for a series of time.
Man, he sure did. Holy
So,
smokes.
if you want to do the play on words there, but still, it is funny how this is, that's where some of these guys have gone. And I think it's interesting that you get those. Those are other voices. You know what I mean? Like, it's easy for an ex-Flyer to come on to something and say, well, he's going to be right for the job because he's part of it. He knows it, all that stuff. You saw like when Jonesy got the president job and they're doing the Stanley Cup final that year on TNT, and Gretzky comes on and says, Mr. Snyder would be happy knowing it's in the right hands. That's substantial from a guy like Wayne Gretzky, who does not have a Flyer tie whatsoever. That means something. You hope that the same kind of energy that they're having with, like, yeah, we can't wait for this. This is awesome. If it is a full circle moment for Tocchet, obviously. So all that stuff plays in. So I once that happened, you had him, there was kind of a finality to the TV thing. Tuesday, it really heated up because you had everything. You had 32 Thoughts said the whole deal about, we went from thinking TV was the likely choice to, well, where was the first place? Elliot Friedman even said it. Where was the first place that you suspected he might go after Vancouver? The answer was Philadelphia. And someone tells him, stick with your gut, because that's where it's going to go. And then John Buccigross put out the tweet that has the picture of him. And that might as well have been all she wrote. And within 24 hours, the news was official.
Right. But as you mentioned there, as Elliot Friedman mentioned on 32 Thoughts, that his source told him, what's the first thing you thought when Rick Tocchet, when it was announced? First of all, when it was announced that Rick Tocchet wasn't negotiating his contract with the Vancouver Canucks a year ago, I went, that's kind of weird. Wonder if he's thinking about coming here. Schwartz is one of his last legs, potentially. I wonder if that's in his mind. And then a little later in the season, when it became clear that he wasn't going to re-sign, and he made it known that he was interested in testing the market, I went, oh, that's kind of weird. I wonder if he's thinking about Philadelphia. Now John Tortorella's gone, so now it's real. And then when they announced that he wasn't coming back and that they were no longer seeking an extension or a new contract, I went, oh, okay, got it. So he's coming to Philadelphia. And obviously, I was hoping that the team could go in a different direction. There's other names. We talked about David Carl luring him out of Denver, which obviously didn't happen. There were other names that were floated around. But in the back of my mind, I went, wow, who would he play with when he came back to Philadelphia around the turn of the century? I wonder who could have possibly been on that hockey team.
Well, by the way, I want to interject here with something, because there was an angle we both totally overlooked, because it's not an easy one because it's not necessarily because it's not a direct Flyers connection, but it turns into one as we go through this. I didn't realize that a young Danny Briere was on the same Phoenix Coyotes teams that Tocchet was, and did not realize that there was he was a teammate of him too at one point. So he has a feeling about this. Okay, like, this isn't like we all kind of just pinpointed this as it's Jonesy. It's Jonesy's bud. That's what's going to happen. And Briere's talking about right away, I remember being a young player coming into the league. I was like 19, 20 years old. I didn't know a whole lot about about playing in this league. And that's the guy I had in my corner.
And you know what? If I could go back in a time machine and tell myself that a year ago,
you probably would have fueled it even further.
I'd make so much money betting on who the next coach of the Flyers was going to be. Oh my goodness.
So you just highlighted the two hurdles to make this happen, because the first one is you can speculate all you want to about what that next job's going to be if Tocchet doesn't stay with Vancouver going all the way back a year ago. It doesn't matter if everybody determines John Tortorella is still the guy, though.
Yep.
Going into that last year of the contract, because Tocchet probably goes somewhere else if that's the case. If he doesn't want Vancouver and still doesn't want to go down that path, but the Flyers job just isn't open. At that point, he's got two options: take a head coaching job at one of these other vacancies, or if they would have made, because I don't know if they would have or not made an assistant coach change under Tortorella in his final year, if he would have even stayed. But you're looking at, would he have gone back to being an assistant like he was for Mike Sullivan and set himself up for the same kind of transition where it was like another year and we knew where it was going, right?
I think it's pretty easy, given who the president of Hockey Ops is, for Rick Tocchet to go spend a year doing TV, and that job's still available
that too.
for him.
Sure.
When it's open.
I'm sure there was a path. The other so after Tortorella's gone, that's one hurdle cleared, and then the other was just formally making it clear that Vancouver was not where he was going to be.
Right. And
I think after, if I'm not mistaken, right after that happened, we did the show, and I came on and I said, I'm prepared to give you 50 Rick Tocchet, 50 the Field.
Yep.
And the field could have included, and the field could have included, I don't know, could have included another 10 names. I could have been splitting that up as Rick Tocchet's got a 50% chance to this job, and Bradshaw, Ian LaPerriere, Jay Woodcroft reportedly got an interview. Pat Firstweiler got an interview. David Carl at that time we would have thrown out there as an option because it was there.
Some other random name.
I mean, guess what?
Some guy who we're not thinking of.
Okay, no, at that time, Mike Sullivan probably had a 5% chance because he wasn't even fired yet at that time. Realistically.
Well, to be fair, he wasn't a free agent very long. He was.
No, I get that, but I'm saying
he was gone in Pittsburgh.
At the very time you were looking at all the possibilities, you were literally sitting there going, Tocchet 50%, and then throw a bunch of names down the line and give everybody like a 5% chance, and that's what it's going to be. That's an area that I think is not going to sit well with some of the fans, because there is an element where it feels like it was just lined up for him, and we didn't do a lot of due diligence in the process. Like, one of the things you hear a lot about when it comes to coaching candidates, and it was brought up at some point in time, I forget where I exactly had heard this, but they brought it, like, it's been brought up as kind of you will do somebody that you know in the industry a favor and get their name out there that you interviewed them, even if that's not where you're going, to try to jumpstart something. That was where
get their name out there.
That was that's quite possibly what happened with Pat Firstweiler, who was buddies with Jonesy, obviously played with Jonesy in college. And possibly what happened with Jay McKee, who played with Danny Briere in Buffalo and is coaching in juniors right now, that you throw their names out there and you go, you're on the radar now. Someone's going to sit there eventually when they have a coaching vacancy and say, what about that guy? At some point. But you may not have been as serious about it. I do think they were legitimately serious about Bradshaw, but only if Tocchet wasn't available.
Fair enough.
Like, kind of. I don't even think, like I said, reportedly Jay Woodcroft got an interview. I think that was very low key, and here's the thing. That's it. That's the 5 names I've got that they specifically reportedly spoke to. I don't even have, like, you can't even but you can't even point to Ian LaPerriere, who I'm sure was considered in some capacity for a little.
His name came up. Right.
But you really can't even consider it, because I highly doubt they would have gone very far in the process while the guy is coaching your minor league team, and say, what were they, out of the playoffs for 3 days before the coaching hire was made official? It's like, I don't think like Ian LaPerriere didn't have a chance to clean out his office at the end of the year before the summer.
Right.
They probably didn't even do exit interviews completely. Like, if you span it over a couple of days, you're like, we just got done. It's probably my first day off the job, and I already know who's got the job. So, you know what I mean? So that, I think, is one of the areas that won't sit well with people, because it just doesn't feel like it was as strong of a due diligence. Now, I'm not going to sit there and try to speculate on, I'm sure, did they contact David Carl and get told, no, I'm just not interested, I want to stay in college, and it never gets out there? Possibly. Is there anybody else? And the thing is that, so, like you already brought it up. Like, you felt this was coming for a long time, right? And I don't care whether you're the biggest supporter of Rick Tocchet and you love this hiring, or you're the biggest detractor and you're just saying same old, same old. You can still acknowledge from either side that you felt it coming.
Inevitable.
And so I kind of want your reaction to it from the fan side of it, because like I said, from a media perspective, I'm not supposed to care who the coach is, and grand scheme of things, also there's an element where it doesn't really matter right this second. It's more about 3 years from now who's coaching the team, and to me, this is a mistake. If 3 years from now, this is not who's coaching your team, because then why would you do it? Kind of, you know what I mean? Like your perfect example, if you were trying to find a bridge for 2 to 3 years tops, to more specifically 2, you give the job to Brad Shaw and you walk away from this and you say, in a couple of years, we try to revisit this.
Okay. Brad gets a first real crack at a head coaching job, gets a little experience under his belt, and then in 2 years we hire a real guy. And not to say Brad Shaw is not, going to end up being a real NHL coach, but
no. And by the way, I feel like we're saying his name enough that we at least need to bring into the conversation that he's not returning to the Flyers.
Correct.
For a totally valid reason. They did not let him go by any stretch. It was his decision to leave. And I think it was summed up basically as he had made it so far in the process that he felt like it was going to be tricky to go back and fully commit himself to the assistant role once again.
Right. Under a guy who you haven't worked under before.
Well, and listen, time changes things, right? Like, we all kind of believed, yeah, he might take the assistant job again. And that's all well and good when you say it right as you're doing your exit interview. And then a month and a half goes by, or a month goes by, and you find out after, potentially, for all I know, you find out after, like, think about it. When was his interview? Was it just the conversation you had at the end of the season, like that week after? And then for 3 weeks, you sat there kind of in limbo going, well, maybe there's a guy out there who gets the job. And if not, then maybe I'm the guy who gets it. And you're drug along for a while until you realize, oh, it's not going to be me. And it just, and there's an element where you're right too, where it doesn't make sense to just staple him to Tocchet's bench crew and say, figure this out. You do have to let Tocchet decide for himself too, who he wants to bring in, whatever it is. And all I will say about that, we don't know anything just yet specifically, but there are some very big potential for that to get super interesting and super familiar, if you know what I mean.
I did want to mention that this is kind of the official full turnover from the old regime, and you asked for my reaction to it as a fan, so I am going to get into that a little bit here. But Torts was the last piece of the old era in a lot of ways, right? Because he was hired under Fletcher, who still had Clark, Barber, whoever else in his ear. And this is kind of the first decision that this team is making in the new era, right? We've heard the phrase "new era of orange" for like almost 2 years now. But now it's real. Like, it's done. Obviously, there's a roster overhaul, and that's in the process. They've, quite frankly, a lot of that's been done as well. But this is the first new hire from a GM and a president that aren't being influenced by the bullies, in theory. So, in a lot of ways, this is the modern version of the Philadelphia Flyers. And I wanted to say that I understand and, quite frankly, agree with a decent bit of the people who are frustrated, because we've known for a year that they're going to hire a guy that both guys played with. Has kind of been the theme of the first, 20 minutes or so of the show here.
Right.
And there's a problem with that. Now, and I'm trying to choose my words carefully here, because I think Rick Tocchet is a good NHL coach. I think he did a lot with a really bad Arizona roster.
And overall situation in general. That's if somebody would have told you when he was let go from that job that within 2-3 years the whole franchise as you know it is gone.
That's what I'm saying. So
then sure.
He was on one of the most poorly run franchises in the league
with no money.
With no money, to the point where they literally had to pick up and move the franchise Baltimore Colts style. And they just fled to Arizona on a plane in the middle of the night, right? And he managed to put a decent roster, or a decent team, on the ice. Now, the roster was poor, but he got blood from a stone with that team. People criticize his tenure in Vancouver, and I get that. There's a lot there. I think that is another situation where people even above the general manager were a problem.
Sure.
If you've paid attention to the NHL, you know that Francesco Aquilini is involved in his team. It's not really a secret.
Mm-hmm.
And I want to say, and now he's coming to a situation where that's not going to happen. But I don't necessarily know that because you
Right.
have a very strong-willed front office, I'll say, and not in a bad way, but Jonesy's a loud personality. Danny has been unafraid to do stuff, right? He's been doing stuff. So I don't know. I certainly get the frustration on Tocchet because it's a Flyer, it's somebody they both played with, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. All of the stuff that the old regime did,
Mm-hmm.
right? You're hiring your buddies.
Sure.
I think he's qualified for the job. I don't necessarily know if he was the most qualified for the job. I would have liked to see Jay Woodcroft. I would have liked to see something a little more out of the box like a Pat Firstweiler. So I am frustrated from the new era of orange angle, and I'm a little frustrated from you're getting a guy who coaches kind of that Tortorella-ish defensive heavy style, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And not to say that, players can't achieve offensive success in Tocchet systems, but
Mm-hmm.
it does tend to be a more defensively responsible system.
Sure.
And after 3 years of Tortorella, I think there are people who were hoping for a change of pace. And I don't know if a change of pace would be good or if it's the correct move to stick with a similar
Mm-hmm.
style and then adapt from there. But that's what we're going to get. And it will be interesting to see. The one thing I really have faith in is going back to Rick Tocchet's time in Pittsburgh.
Sure.
He's a guy, and just going back through his whole career, frankly, but
Mm-hmm.
he's a guy who has good relationships with his superstars.
Yes.
Most of the time. Unless your name's JT Miller, but whatever.
That doesn't sound like a coach problem in that sense. That sounds like an organization problem, and also and also I'm fed up with Elias Pettersson.
So I'm hoping that this is a hire for Matvei Mishkov, right?
Mm-hmm.
That you've done enough talking to talk that it's understood what the plan is with the kid, whatever the plan is. And I hope it's let him play just as a fan, but
right.
Assuming that they are all unified on what the game plan should be for Matvei Mishkov's development.
Mm-hmm.
Overall, I think I'm pretty okay with this hire.
I would say, what I would say is, because you threw out a lot there, so I want to try to touch on some of the points, some of the points that stand out to me.
Things I'm frustrated with, but overall, I think it's a relatively good hire.
And here's the thing. The former Flyer thing, I'm not going to say it doesn't bother me, but it's also somewhat of a lazy take, not on your part. Like, here's what I mean. Teams everywhere hire former players. I know that they have more of a tendency to do that than others have in the past, but it does happen just about everywhere. So I don't like to make it exclusive to the Flyers. What I will say is this, and I brought this up on one of our recent shows, because Tocchet is now joining the same situation that basically Keith Jones and Danny Briere have been in for 2 seasons now, which is your reputation within the fan base is on the line here. You are taking a risk to say, I want to fix this thing for the great fans that we have. And if you don't do it, I brought up, think about how, like, these are all people who, as players or just representatives of the organization, every single one of these people, one of them already is, but the other 2 could just as easily all be put in the Flyers Hall of Fame at some point. Tocchet already is. Briere could easily become part of that just from his playoff performances over the years, let alone
30 points in 2010 gets him in.
Sure,
I don't care what else he did.
Let alone the job he currently has.
Yep.
Keith Jones has been Keith Jones never left after 2000.
I'm surprised he's not already in, frankly.
Well, I hear you. There's a lot of other people you can also throw in that have been around for a long time that you think that would be deserving. But anyway. So they all have this reputation already, Jonesy as a broadcaster, Briere was a fan favorite. Let's be real about his reputation. And Tocchet was too during his day playing wise too. Like fans loved him as a player. He goes, I mean, I can't tell you the number of times I saw the clip floating around of, hey, they were playing Toronto and he beat the crap out of Wendell Clark, and that made people love him to death, right? And stuff like that. Of course, that's the type of stuff that starts this whole thing. But you do take that risk when you put yourself in another job within the same organization. I've never seen it be more apparent than with Ron Hextall.
Oh yeah, you bet your reputation.
Everybody loved Ron Hextall, the guy who probably had a few wires crossed as a goalie. All the stuff. Of course he did. You know what I mean? I'm saying.
Ask Chris Chelios if he had a few wires crossed.
Bingo, exactly. Don't take out our superstar player. And watch what happens. I'm coming for you. Watch your ankles when you're standing in front of the net because he's taking hacks at you the entire game. He's shooting the puck like he's a forward. All that stuff.
And if you mention Ron Hextall to a Flyers fan now and say, "What do you think the job Ron Hextall did?" They'll go, "Oh,
right," because you're thinking of Ron Hextall, the GM. Forget the goalie. Ron Hextall, the GM, ended up tarnishing his reputation with Flyers fans, And to me, that is also like that downfall is also what set off the group of others. And I want to point out something interesting. I'm actually going to switch from just talking about, like, we have Tocchet up here. So I'm going to switch and I'm bringing this up.
And by the way, the only Flyer in history to successfully separate his management career from his playing career was Bob Clark. He did a great job.
He did. Now, hang on a second, though, because that's what I wanted to point out. Or that's at least an avenue that I wanted to go to. Because here's your list of head coaches for the last quarter of a century. Essentially, Craig Ramsey took over after the 1999-2000 season was over. So I'm just starting there for sake of argument. But I'm going through that list and I go, truly, how many former Flyers are on that list right now?
Order. Stevens technically,
and I'll give that to you. I count it as a technicality.
Berube.
Yep.
Tocchet. I think that's the end of the list, right?
And there is one other guy who goes beyond this list as a head coach that had the same former Flyer ties, because at one point in time, Paul Holmgren was your head coach. Every other head coach of the franchise has not been anybody who came back and as that type of thing. You had your originals, starting with the very early days, and then Fred Shero, obviously, for the championship teams. When they brought Pat Quinn in, there's no connection there. Now, if you would have gone back to Pat Quinn at some point, like around the time when he was coaching the Leafs at some point and when that had ended or something, then sure, now you're bringing him back in some capacity. But everybody was different. When they go out in the 80s and bring Mike Keenan in, that's not, we're doing the same old buddy system. That's, we're just hiring who we think the best guy is. Where this argument comes up is not necessarily the coaching thing, because you have, as mentioned, that is what, maybe 5 of your 25 head coaches.
But real quick on that, if looking at this list here, if you remove the interims, that's not fair.
They still count.
But okay, but for what I'm about to say here, if you remove the interims,
yes.
If you remove the interims, the former Flyers are the worst head coaches on that list when they were here. Berube has obviously evolved. But I'm looking at this list and going, really? Do you think was John Stevens a better head coach than, frankly, anybody on that list?
Yeah, he was a better head coach than Dave Haxtell. Haxtell got him to a couple of playoff appearances by, not by a lot of skill by any stretch. Stevens got them to a conference final in 2008.
I would argue they got there in spite of John Stevens, frankly.
Maybe
I
they
get what
did.
You're saying.
Maybe they did. I mean, look, you also have to factor in totally. We're talking two different eras here. If you're going from Barber to where Tocchet lines up now too, Barber got the super teams. Let's be real. You know who were on those teams when Barber was coaching. That was when all of a sudden you would turn around at the trade deadline and Jeremy Roenick comes walking through the door, and here comes Tony Amani and Alexei Zhamnov and like stuff like. And I'm going a little further because I think more or less those were Hitchcock's teams, but you know what I mean. It's like they did everything in their power to bring in whoever else, right? Because money wasn't an object. Now money is an object when it comes to this stuff. And that just, and you know what? Here's the thing too, to further the argument for Stevens, kind of in the same way with Berube, honestly, you at least could lean on he coached all these guys. Like Stevens took the job, and he took the job at the same time, essentially, that Mike Richards is debuting, Jeff Carter, RJ Umberger, and Taro Ninamaki's your goalie. And you're looking at the head coach now going, well, you just had all these guys and you just won with them. Make something happen.
Guys that he had just coached to a Calder Cup,
Calder Cup
prior, right?
So I think that's valid. Okay, this is where I think this narrative though really comes up, because post Berube, then, regardless of how you want, like to your statement about whether they're all the worst coaches on here, whatever, you did what everybody wanted you to try to do. You have a college coach on here. You went with a veteran who you thought was the best solution. You went with another veteran who you thought was the best solution. And now you're kind of doing both.
Blending.
You're going veteran who also played here at some point. And
who may not have been the best option.
But still, it's been 10 years since you had a coach who was an ex-player.
That is true.
And the last 10 years haven't gone particularly well, so might as well see what happens with this situation. Where I think that the argument comes in, and I didn't make a graph for this one, but I'll just start you down the line, because from the very beginning of the Flyers' existence, you have, like, you can't start with X people, right? Like, you can't start with X's. You have to start somewhere. So you start down the path, and there's a couple of different situations here, right? And then all of a sudden, it's 1984. The franchise has now been around for just under 20 years at this point. You're getting closer to 20 years. So for 20 years, you've run this thing exactly the way that, there's nobody else, essentially. You practically, by that point, have almost been, how many coaches would they have had at that point? 6 or 7?
Not many, yeah.
And you've had 3 general managers in 17 years. Tenure is not an issue, right? And it's 1984, and here comes the 4th general manager that the team has ever had. Now, I want to preface this by telling you that the franchise only has had 10 general managers in history. So we're about to start a segment here where it's only going to be 6 people, and we're going to span 30 years or 40 years. I'm sorry, 40 years. You know who the first name I'm going to say is then.
How many of them lifted the Stanley Cup for the Philadelphia Flyers in 1974?
How many of these general managers? Only one of them.
Okay.
But that's where we're starting, because you start with Bob Clark for 6 years. Then Clark leaves. This was when he went, and I think he was in Florida for a few years.
Yeah, didn't he go to the WHA for a hot second, or was that something different?
No, I think that was something different, because remember, it's the early 90s. Clark goes to Florida and gives Chuck Fletcher his first ever job in hockey.
Right.
And listen, not a lot of people are going to sit there and look fondly on Russ Farwell as a general manager, because it was during basically your other longest playoff drought in franchise history. But he is behind one of the biggest trades you will ever make in your franchise's history, which involves bringing the rights to Eric Lindros into the picture. Fine. Yeah. Now it's 1994. We're back, because Bob Clark is back in the general manager's chair, and it's go time. 94-95, you're in the conference finals. 1997, you're in the cup final. 2000, you're in your conference finals again. 2004 conference finals. And all of this is while Bob Clark is the general manager. So you're having that same run of success while he's running the show.
Well, and look at some of those rosters. Let's be real. Those rosters were insane. Some of the iconic Flyers rosters.
Then you make the natural transition from Clark to Holmgren. And Holmgren holds the job as general manager for another 8 years.
Yeah, it was only 8 years.
It was.
Much longer.
Because here's the problem. Because then he just basically morphed into the president of hockey operations only. essentially. Then you bring in Hextall, which lasts for nearly another. It's over 4 more years. You were on year 5 of Hextall before it hit a breaking point. We're done here, and that
He
it
was got
goes
fired
downhill.
too early.
Maybe for what he was trying to do, but maybe not for some of the other methods. Particularly, you're talking about what, a year?
It was the
a year
impatient
after,
bullies. Anyway,
but it was a year plus after the draft with Nolan Patrick and the thought that there was other opinions that he wasn't listening to. Blah blah blah. You know the story by now.
Sure.
You go from Hextall and now you're breaking up the string. You have had former Flyers in that general manager position consistently since 1994. At that point, it's 2018. So you break the trend and you bring in from the outside Chuck Fletcher.
And why did you mention Chuck Fletcher a minute ago?
Yeah, I know, but still,
Okay.
never. But we're saying from the outside because he never had a job with the Flyers.
Sure.
That's the point of being on the outside. And then
here's the thing though. His connection is the Flyer. That's the only reason I'm willing to lump him into the same category.
I got you.
Yeah, I understand he didn't play here. I understand he didn't coach here, but his job reference when they said, "Do you know anybody who works here?" He wrote down Bob Clark.
Sure, I understand that. Once that disaster was over, 5 years later, or nearly 5 years later, again, you're in year 5 of this. Okay, Danny Briere is the next in line. You give him the job for the rest of the year, and then you put it on him officially. And we're back to where we started with this, where now you're on 4 of your last 5, or 5 of your last 7, if you want to count the first Clark tenure and the second Clark tenure, have been former Flyers. That to me, and then it's the connection of, because like perfect example, we got the coaches list up. Who's the first former Flyer on the list? And I'm talking about reverse order, like
bottom up, Barber.
Yeah, bottom up. Okay, what was he doing 5 years ago?
Sitting next to Bobby Clark.
No, he was the advisor to Dave Scott, the owner, essentially.
Sitting next to Bobby Clark, so was he.
No. I know, but I'm saying. So that's the person who's advising your non-hockey owner representation.
Yep.
Clark is still sitting in the box. Holmgren is still sitting in the box. That the Hextall downfall started to put a spotlight on, well, why don't we have, it's this guy and this guy and this guy, and why do we keep doing this over and over and over again? So
that's
now
when we started shouting about it on the show.
Sure. So now they circle it back, right? It may be a new era with similar figures, but it's new people that you want to believe, for their experience, have a connection to the modern game better than any of the other people we've mentioned. That's what you want to believe, right?
Right.
So
if the directive from Comcast top down was, hey, modernize the team, but like keep doing things the same way over the last 10 years or so, I'll say, then they've done a great job, right? Because you moved from those names you were mentioning, Clark and Barber and the Holmgren type. And what era does that remind you of? Okay, now we have jumped forward, right? Like Bob Clark and Bill Barber are they're the generation that my grandparents grew up watching as adults and my parents grew up watching as kids.
Sure.
We have moved to an era where our president of hockey ops and our head coach are people that you and I watched as kids. And our head coach is a guy we watched as teenagers into adults.
Young adults, yeah.
They've just done the same thing.
Sure. And so here's something I want to point out, going off of one of the things you said during your whole thing too, because you're calling this like the first big decision the new era makes, right?
Yeah. As far as the head coach, the first big staffing decision.
First big staffing decision is fair, but to me, the first big decision that Jones and Briere had to make in their tenure just happened to be right out of the gate, 2023 NHL draft. And you can say that Michkov fell into their laps, or they lucked into it, or whatever you want to say, but he didn't play in his draft year as expected. He comes over this past season. It's early. To me, like, this starts the clock, right? Like, you complete this season, you have next season. You have the 26-27 season after that. And at that point, you're going to be on, if you can believe it, the 5th offseason of Jones and Briere. You'll have 2 seasons of Tocchet behind the bench. and Michkov will be through his entry-level deal and be due a new contract. If you are not at minimum close to the finish line on rebuilding at least a playoff team, at least being a playoff team in that time, that's when I think you could see it get blown up again. Because to me, they need to have some immediate results. Not necessarily like you don't have to be a contender tomorrow, and you're not going to be a contender tomorrow. But if you're not taking a significant step forward in 2 seasons to be able to go into doing the thing that I think that they really want to try to do when it comes down to it, and maybe sign the last piece, right? We know what we need, because you can't do it right now. You can't do it with, we need centers. We need a top-end defenseman. We could use a goalie. We could use all the too much stuff. Right. The list is too long. If you can go into that last year of it and be like, we're one center away, one top 6 center away.
Or one.
All right. Or one solid, one solid
Right.
defenseman away, whatever it may be, right? You have the 6th overall pick and 6 more draft picks in the first 2 rounds this year. You have money coming off the books over the next 2 off seasons. If you don't at least seriously challenge for a playoff spot in the next 2 seasons, I wonder if that's the chopping block for Jones and Briere.
I get that. I think you can still take 25-26 this upcoming season. Gavin McKenna's really good, and if you're in the bottom 10-ish to the point where you can lottery jump to get him, I think you're okay with that for this year. But I agree with you. I think you need to be okay. I am saying this on May 19th, 2025, and right now, the Eastern Conference is still pretty weak. If the Eastern Conference is still this weak in the 26-27 season, which obviously can change, if the season looks like this season did, I think you need to be in the playoffs.
Fair.
I think challenging for a playoff spot.
Mm-hmm.
If you're okay, here's the thing: if you're 2 or more pieces away, I understand, but it's time to go. If you're 1 piece away, I'm a little nervous because you're 1 piece away and you're only just contending for the playoffs. I don't know if that's good enough.
Well, I think that's going to come down, it's going to come down to all of that stuff factoring in, right? Yeah, you shouldn't be 1 piece away and just barely creeping into the playoffs, but you need to at least make some form of noise here in some capacity. You know what next year is going to turn into for a lot of this again? It's going to kind of be an evaluation year again, because now you got to see who works with Tocchet. Yep. Even if there's similarities to his style and Tortorella's, you need to still see what works and then determine who's here for the long haul, and do all of that. One area that people do think Tocchet is supposed to be able to help is the power play. So would love to see if some people get their numbers boosted a little bit by scoring a few more power play goals. That maybe would make people feel a little bit better about some stuff, But let's go back to Tocchet for 1 second here with this, because everybody's been asking, is he the right fit? And you brought it up too. You talked about some of that a little bit. I don't know stylistically. He's more of a play, and I'm not talking about on the ice style completely here with that, but he's more of a player's coach than Tortorella was.
Which I think is a good thing.
Yeah, I think he knows how to mostly keep star players happy and earn their respect. Yep. But I don't know what to expect from him with the current talent on the team. And this is kind of where I was going with this, is that, okay, you can feel whatever you want to feel about this, today and going into this upcoming season. Nothing was going to change. You could have Rick Tocchet, Brad Shaw, Scotty Bowman, Fred Shearo's ghost back on the bench. It without some improvements to the roster, it's not going to make a difference who's coaching the team. So you can't just look at the results and say whatever. I do think, we brought up Michkov for a good reason. You don't go into this process and not ask questions about that kid to whoever's coaching the team and figure out exactly what you are going to find out from who's coaching him, 1, and 2, making sure, to me, you want to know how good this is of a hiring this is, watch his numbers next year. And I'm not saying it means it's going to be good or bad. I'm saying if the numbers feel like they're down, doesn't seem like it's a good fit. If he takes off a little bit and starts having that kind of offensive year, starting to perform maybe with more consistency the way he did when Shaw took over again. because right away a lot of people pointed out, because Michkov was quoted in a Russian translated article about how much he liked how Tortorella coached him. He felt like he was the best coach he ever had, blah, 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 all that type of stuff. And I'm not discounting that from his perspective, but a lot of people immediately jumped on, well, then why'd you get rid of Torts if Meach got, like, because he's like, as if this is the one guy on the team that everything revolves around him. And I get where you're coming from with that mindset, but I'm sitting here going, Rick Tocchet being the coach of this team is better for Cam York. It's better for, you know, who it's also better for? Your captain.
Absolutely.
And I understand that people, like, I think some people just are choosing to be miserable for the sake of being miserable. Because I put out, you know, they put the video out, that the whole group, it's Briere, Jones, and Hilferty sitting in a room calling Sean Couturier to tell him we're hiring Rick Tocchet. And I know Couturier doesn't sound like he's doing cartwheels or anything like that. I've been around Sean Couturier since the beginning of my time doing this. That's not who he is. He is as even-keeled, does not really show a ton of emotion in any circumstance whatsoever, except for maybe on the ice on occasion. But he is not that kind of person. So I didn't take anything from it. To me, I like the idea that they even bothered to do that, because most years they don't bother. Especially, like, let's put it this way. They weren't allowed to do next to nothing, it felt like, as long as John Tortorella's around, because everything is a secret inside the room. Like, no cameras. If you got anything with Tortorella on camera, it's a miracle. You know what I mean? So, but I think that stuff goes a long way, whether you agree with Tocchet being hired or not. I think showing that, hey, here's the three people who are in charge of everything. They're the most powerful people in the organization. Here they are calling the team's captain to inform him of a decision, telling him, spread the news to your teammates. We wanted to get it to you before the word got out through the media. Go ahead and tell them this is who your coach is going to be.
So they must have told him, like, last week, right?
I don't know about that, but we'll see.
I'm joking.
I know.
So,
but my point is that I think that type of stuff goes a really long way in building a connection with the fan base. This is what we do. Here it is for you to see. And of course, there were some people who were going, well, if he wasn't such, you know, a lack of personality and, oh, he sounded thrilled and blah, blah. It's like, you got to know what these types of things are. I just think it's important to see things in action, even if even if there's elements of some staging involved with it, like they know what they're going to say to a degree. It doesn't matter. Like, I'd rather see it than not see the effort put in to do anything. Like I always like the videos of people that, you know, you see it in baseball a lot. A guy gets called up. He's going to make his first start in the major leagues. He's named the opening day starter for the first time, something like that. And they have a camera planted in the manager's office as they call him in and say, we're telling you this news. I think stuff like that's great, because you get raw emotion out of it in some capacity, and it's a big deal, right?
Absolutely.
So I like that type of stuff, and I think that matters. So what I worry about more when it comes to Tocchet is the average, and we talked about this on the last show, the shelf life of a head coach, the average tenure that somebody has. Because right now it's like less than 2 years. And like I said, like from Tocchet's perspective, I go, let's see what happens in 3 years' time with Tocchet. It's if that's where, you know, if that's where it potentially ends, because there's a lack of progress, it's slowing down, it feels like you're in the same spot where there's a need for a new voice, and whatever line you want to use that's used 20 times over when something like this happens.
Yep.
And Tocchet turns into more of a transition guy than the finished product guy, then I'm not sure I fully understand why you did this, if that's the case. But if he does turn into the long-term hire, you know, the hard part for me to understand with that is that Tocchet's 61 years old, and I'm not convinced that he's still the guy in this position when he's 65, let's just say. But I could be proven wrong if they start making steps. That's all. What I basically wrote about from here on out is that now the ball is in Briere's court and Jonesy's court, and to a degree, Dan Hilferty as well, because this is, as you brought up, this is your first decision that you are making, you know, okay, hiring position, but also this has to be the first decision in a long line of decisions from here on out that you get right. If you like, you need to make sure, like, okay, you got the coach right. What's next? You need to get the 6th overall pick right. You need to get the rest of the draft somewhat right to have a solid class. You need to get free agent signings right. You need to, if you're going to do an offer sheet this offseason, you better get it right. You don't have it. You don't have the luxury of sitting here going, well, we took a chance and it just didn't work out. No, you should have been taking your chances 5 years ago.
Right, because you mentioned it earlier. It comes down to that 26-27 offseason. If I'm Dan Hilferty, I'm looking down and going, what are you doing? Where are we? Like if they miss the playoffs next year, they miss the playoffs the year after that, they're still, two significant pieces away, whatever the case may be. If they're shy of where they need to be, at a certain point, Dan Hilferty has to look at it and go, listen, thanks for getting us Matvei Mishkov and all, but he's 22. You're wasting him.
Right. Exactly.
Like,
So,
he's already, we're about to sign him for hopefully $12 million a season because he's earned it. But
yeah.
it's, you're looking at it and going, what am I supposed to do if I wait any longer? This kid's going to be 26 and his window's closing and he's Mitch Marner walking to free agency. Like, we'll get into that.
No, but you've got to be careful with those decisions this offseason because you can't now become infatuated with let's try to build a team, for Tocchet or whatever the case may be that not wrecks this, but that you eventually look back on and say it's a mistake. Like, okay, we're going to use this to shift to playoffs.
Nope.
One of the teams that just got knocked out of the playoffs was the Toronto Maple Leafs. We'll talk about all that part later, but I've seen multiple mentions of could Mitch Marner be a flyer, or people saying that they should go all in on Marner. And
no,
yeah, do you want to know my reasoning? I can give you a great reason, and I can give you the reason in 2 words.
Okay.
Claude Giroux. You know why? If you thought Claude Giroux was overpaid and you didn't like the production and you sure didn't like the playoff production, meet Mitch Marner. And except Mitch Marner is going to make $5 million more than Claude Giroux ever did.
What would you say is the big criticism out of Mitch Marner from Toronto fans?
It's not going to necessarily, okay, I don't know if it's going to be the criticism. Well, for criticism, it's going to be playoff performance. It's going to be showing up in the big moment.
Okay. That's all I need.
Yep. My answer to you, I've categorized him before. I've called him on this show before. I call Marner an elite sidekick.
Absolutely.
He's great when you put him with the right guy. But guess what? If that, okay, let's call it, if you're a sidekick to a superhero, essentially, if the superhero is not showing either, you got problems. And the sidekick can't bail you out. And so when Austin Matthews isn't doing it, or William Nylander's not doing it, or John Tavares isn't doing it, listen, what's going on? You know what I mean?
I know you've seen the game 5, 6, and 7 stats for the Toronto Core 4. Like, I know you've seen them. So when the lights get bright, Mitch Marner disappears at best.
I saw it pop up just yesterday. Marner's game 7 stats are no goals, 2 points, and 6 of them.
And he's probably something like -4 or 5 too, if I had to guess.
Probably. Like, but didn't we not go over this?
Kevin, you've been covering in this sports in this town for a decade?
Yeah.
Okay.
Over at this point, yeah.
Okay. I'm going to look you straight in the face and I'm going to ask you a very simple yes or no question.
Go ahead.
Will the city of Philadelphia tolerate that?
Absolutely not.
Okay. Thank you.
And I know it because I watched what they did to Claude Giroux. I mean, I'm not saying that Claude Giroux wasn't appreciated, but that was always the criticism. Oh, the playoffs roll around. The guy's barely a point per game player. Like is Mitch Marner? If you put Mitch Marner on the Flyers tomorrow, is he one of the best players on the team? Of course he is.
Absolutely.
Is he going
during the regular season?
Right. No, is he going to be point per game or close to? Absolutely is. Even with the roster that they have, he probably can be that. But I'm just going to tell you right now, you finally have something that you haven't had in half of a decade. Know what that is? Cap space. You're going to have $24 million in cap space. You want to throw away more than 50% of it on that? Be my guest, but you're going to hate it within the next 5 years.
And listen, here's the thing. I get the argument that you're putting an elite player with him. I understand why fans look at that player and go, yeah, I would take him on my team, because you look at your team and go, man, we don't have any guys like that right now.
I'm going to give you another reason why you shouldn't do it. Travis Konechny. You know why? I heard a lot of people hate the contract for Konechny. Like, why are they giving him $8 million? And it's like, you're worried about $8 million?
Listen, Mitch Marner's not going to make 14.
That's not my point, though. He's going to make way more than double figures, though. He's going to make 12 to 13.
I don't know about that. I really don't.
I think somebody out there is going to, like, here. Okay, so, and but this is my point. Somebody's going to be willing to do it. Don't be the team that's willing to do it.
Well, here's the thing. Mitch Marner is going to have a decision to make. it came out that a couple of years ago when he ended up signing this contract in Toronto, the Columbus Blue Jackets offered him 13.
Okay.
And it as an offer sheet. And he declined that, did not sign it, signed with Toronto instead. He's going to be faced with a similar choice this time, where it's money or a good team. But that good team won't have the Toronto factor for a Toronto kid. He is going to have to make a legitimate, straight up choice. Cash or possible success. It's that simple. And
sure,
I don't think he's coming to Philadelphia regardless.
No, I don't either. Believe it or not,
the money's going to be what you think it is.
I'm going to guess what? I'm going to tease something for you because right away I looked at the free agent list because, okay, that's another thing about Tocchet really quick too is, right, Briere went there. One of the things that Rick Tocchet can do is possibly attract free agents.
He said he's already gotten calls from agents.
Sure. I'm just going to tease it because we don't need to jump to conclusions, not jump to conclusions, but we got a long way to go until free agency starts. So as we build up to that show eventually, I'm just going to tell you right now, I already have one name in the back of my mind that I would not be surprised to see them maybe take a run at. And it's not somebody that's at the top of the free agent list because it's not a great class either. Let's be real. But it's not at the top of the list, but it's going to have some value of name recognition that you can at least if you want to take a guess, I'll let you take a guess. If you don't get it on the first guess, I'm not going to I
don't even know if he's a free agent. Connor Garland.
It's not a bad guess actually, because at least you're looking at the right team.
The same, well, of course it's a Canuck, yeah.
But there's some. Let's put it this way: the guy I'm thinking of, if you did sign him, immediately goes into your top 6.
That's half the Canucks roster.
Immediately goes into your top 6, helps your power play, and you see if you can unlock. What's that?
You're not talking about Brock Besser, are you?
I am. Because he had the best year of his career production wise under Tocchet, and I'm just saying.
I've been a very big fan of Brock Besser for a long time. I would be listen, the fans that want Mitch Marner should want Brock Besser instead. You want them to go out and get a winger for your top 6? That's your guy.
Potentially, and the problem is it's not a center. I get that.
For the value.
Sure.
Right.
But it was the first name that I looked at on that free agent list and went, oh, there was a guy who had a great year under him. I can see them making a call being like, hey, we're ready.
I would be very happy for Brock Besser to be a Philadelphia Flyer. I really would.
And I don't think it's a stretch because, like, I'm sorry, you can look down half of that free agent list. They're not. I don't want to say they're not because that's not fair to act like I know who they're targeting and who they're not. They shouldn't be targeting any of these guys who are 33, 34 years old.
Probably not. Nope.
That's not who you should be going for.
Unless it's Claude Giroux.
Even then, I think that ship has sailed because you're not in the position you should be to target him.
Listen,
I would do it.
I would cut off my left arm to get Claude Giroux on this team for 2 more years. I really would.
You know, do you know what's funny about that, by the way, is, okay, so I just said, like, if they went out and signed Marner, of course, Marner's like one of the top 2 players on the roster today, right? Of course.
And I'm left-handed, by the way.
Probably the top, by the way, because, like, we're going off of Michkov's potential here. Like, it's not there yet. Fine. Guess what? If he's the top player on the team, you know what? Claude Giroux probably would be too if you brought him in there today. But it's close. He's in the top 3. Listen, like, maybe Giroux is in the category of same as Konechny, and Michkov's potential goes over the top of Giroux, but, like, you're right there, and you know it.
Listen, I know they got traded for each other, but I would chop off my right arm to watch Owen Tippett and Claude Giroux play on the same team.
Right, but you're not going to tell me that based on what you've seen so far from the production numbers that Giroux isn't still having better years than Tippett is.
I agree. I'm not taking anything away from that.
And that's why I'm saying Giroux would still be a top 3 player on the roster today if you brought him back. And 3 years later than when you traded him. You know what I mean? Like, you know what I mean? So that's a sign of things. That's all I'm saying.
Okay.
But all right. So let's get to the playoffs.
Yeah, let's transition into the playoffs here. That Rick Tocchet is the new head coach. We will see what that brings as the season comes. There's really not a whole lot we can do about that now. So presuming they talked to him about Matvei Mishkov, which I assume they did.
Sure.
That's all that really matters. So, okay, getting into the playoffs here. We had some second round matchups that we're going to breeze through real quick here, and then we have some conference finals to predict.
Yep.
Where do you want to start for this one, Kevin?
That I was really surprised with a couple of shorter series than I expected. Did not expect. I mean, I had the Washington series going 7 and Washington winning it. So Carolina totally got me on that one.
See, it's really funny because I had that as a short series, but I had that as a short series for the Washington Capitals.
You had Washington in 6. That wasn't
okay. Yeah, but it was 5 or 6 is what I was saying.
Okay, so, fair enough.
I respected Rod enough to give them that second game, and they just took 4 of them.
Both of us totally got the length. Both of us had that Vegas Edmonton series going 7, and I picked the right team, but I still thought it was going to take 7.
That felt a lot like that Carolina series a couple years ago where they got swept and Rod Brindamore came out and said that they didn't get swept even though they got swept.
That was against Florida, ironically against Florida.
Right. It felt like that where it was a bunch of close games.
That was the conference finals too, wasn't it? Because that ended with Matthew Tkachuk scoring in the final 5 seconds to get him to the cup final, I believe.
Maybe, yeah. And then, but this Edmonton Vegas series felt a lot like that, where most of the games were pretty tight. It was a pretty well contested series. Edmonton just kind of took 4. So,
yeah. I don't really have much on the Dallas series because I wasn't surprised by that. I nailed that one, Dallas in 6.
I think I had
Dallas in 5.
Dallas in 5. Okay. I do just want to take a quick second, shout out and condolences to Mark Scheifele, an absolutely heroic performance in Game 6.
I felt awful for that guy sitting in the penalty box as the season ended.
Hours after his father died unexpectedly, he stays with the team. He plays,
scores the first goal of the game.
I'm like goosebumps just thinking about it. Like when people talk about amazing moments in hockey, that's right up there, man. Like that's one of those. That's Brett Favre throwing 400 yards after his dad dies on Monday Night Football.
Sure.
Like this is that, but in the playoffs, and it's just an incredible performance out of Mark Scheifele.
Yeah. So like, and I want to bring this up because Toronto ruined this narrative for me because had they won, and by the way, Toronto led the series 2-0. And had a 2-0 lead very early in Game 3, and then a 3-1 lead early second period of Game 3, and somehow or other lost that series in 7, with 2 of maybe the most horrendous performances on home ice you are going to see back to back ever.
Horrendous. And I think there's a real argument that Sam Bennett won that series for the Florida Panthers with an elbow to Anthony Stolarz' head.
Well, sure, but I was about to say, by the way, that's another no, by the way. Because there's a lot of people also clamoring for the Flyers should go out and spend their money on Sam Bennett or something like that. And it's like, you're not going to like that contract either, guys. I promise you, you're not going to like that contract either.
At least Sam Bennett makes some amount of sense.
Stylistically, sure, I get that. But what I'm saying is that you're not, again, it goes back to the Konechny thing, right? If you think that Travis Konechny makes too much money on that contract extension, wait until you see what Sam Bennett's worth. And you might think he's worth more than Konechny in the end. That's fine. But again, I'm telling you, with a lack of, it's still a lack of cap space if you throw $10 million at somebody or close to.
I understand. What I mean? I understand it a little bit more just for positional need more than anything.
And I understand from positional need as well. All I'm saying is that I would rather wait and see what the draft holds first before you jump into, I need to get a guy like that. I just don't see that aging well either. But anyway,
I don't disagree. I'm hoping that the Philadelphia Flyers get their top 2 centers, one on draft day and one via offer sheet on July 1st. But
possibly, yeah, who knows? So Toronto ruined my narrative because if Toronto had won the series and moved on, I was going to sit there and say that you had 4 teams that all have like gotten to this point and are having something to prove. They're the teams that were in like the prove it year, right? How many years have we been sitting there talking about Carolina being on the cusp of this, right? Edmonton got to the cup final last year. Dallas, we've loved Dallas for how many years in a row? And they've been to 1 Stanley Cup final over this time,
Yep.
And Toronto obviously had the monkey, has plenty of the monkey on their back with, can't get out of the first round for all those years. Now you're still looking at can't get out of the second round, that kind of thing. Florida doesn't have to prove anything. They won the cup last year and they're on the repeat trail again. If they make the cup final, it'll be their third straight appearance in the cup final too. Like there's nothing to prove there. But you're looking at the other three teams, like how many years of Rod and Aho and Svechnikov and that defensive core and Freddie Anderson and right, we go down this list. How many years of this? And it's like, okay, now it's your time to prove that it's your time. And Edmonton doesn't need to prove it's their time to get back to the cup final per se. They made a cup final, but Dallas kind of does. Like, especially with this group. Like, I don't even like Dallas wasn't even this put together quite yet. Like they were somewhat, but they weren't this put together yet. Certainly no Rantanen. And you go back to Wyatt Johnston was just was just a rookie and, all that type of pieces and things like that. Like you're talking about guys who just entered the picture here. Thomas Harley, who got the goal that gets him to the conference final in overtime. These are the pieces. These are the pieces that we've raved about that you want to see in that next step. Last time they were in the cup final, Ottinger wasn't even part of the picture. Their goalie was Anton Hudobin.
And I know we talk about the transition of the Stars from the older era to the new era, and Robertson and Hintz and all these younger guys have been holding their own.
Mm-hmm.
But man, Jamie Benn is just a pig in mud the deeper you go into the playoffs, isn't he?
Sure. Well, yeah, because he can get away with more.
Just absolute homicide on the ice every single night.
Yeah, but I want to give also like serious props, and this is not like we talked about them bridging that gap before. Tyler Seguin's been really good in these playoffs and
absolutely
kind of continues to defy time in a way because it feels like he's been around forever. It feels like,
and with some horrendous injuries.
We're talking about a guy whose rookie season was the Cup in Boston.
Yep,
and he's still pulling it off after all those injuries, like you said, 14 years later. Good for him. And
absolutely.
And
you know what, kids? You too can party through your early 20s and still be fine in your mid to late 30s.
So right away, I mean, I think we're in for two fantastic series. I think we should just dive deeper into those series instead of talking about the rest. Like we saw the other stuff before or whatever. It just blew my mind how like Florida looked down and out, looked like they weren't even interested in playing in that series. And then they were, and Toronto wasn't. Edmonton and Carolina look really good right now. They're really like, I'll tell you right up front, and you know this, my preseason cup final prediction was Dallas, Florida. And that is obviously on the table right here.
Sure is.
Those other two teams are really making me rethink some of that right now. And that's how good they've been in these playoffs. And I don't know if it's good or bad for those two teams right now that they had more time than the other two did. Might not be a good thing when it comes down to it. It might not be a great thing that Carolina just sat there for a while Florida went to game 7, but tough series for Florida. So it goes either way, right? Like either Florida's going to be really spent or it's not going to affect them one bit. We'll see.
Or it's a momentum boost and they roll. Right.
Yeah. So let's.
Well, and the other factor in that, and we can start in the East here.
Yep. That's what I want to start with. Cause that's the first, that is the first.
Okay.
No, but that's the first game being played of the two that starts on Tuesday.
And that's what I wanted to mention. So you mentioned, Carolina's been sitting there for a little while. Edmonton's been sitting there for a while. Florida played a game 7 last night as we're sitting here recording. Like they played a game 7 on Sunday night against Toronto.
And play Tuesday in game 1. Yeah.
Right. Obviously they, Paul Maurice had the fortune of, being able to take his foot off the gas a little bit down the stretch there, rest the big guys the last couple of minutes at least. But here's the thing, and this will change once we go out west.
Yes.
What I'm about to say about the Carolina Hurricanes, the rest is good for them because I think that team lives and dies in this playoff run on Freddie Anderson.
That's fair. Having Freddie Anderson be the
and having him have a little bit of extra time. Didn't play a whole lot of games in the regular season. They kept the load pretty light for him. He's been carrying the load through the playoffs, but he's a guy that if he plays 4 games in a week, he's going to start to slow down a little. If he plays, 2 full 7-game rounds in a row over the span of 4 weeks, he's probably not going to be the same goalie coming forward. Now
Right.
he's sitting here with several days off. He gets to come in fresh. Obviously, Sam Bennett might elbow him in the head and, take him out of the series. But if he doesn't do that, I think the Carolina Hurricanes have a real shot here.
Oh, I think they have a real shot. I wasn't taking that away at all. I really think
Yeah.
they have it. I definitely think they have a shot, and it's rooted in how well they play defensively first and foremost, and then
Of course.
Different guys making things happen in different ways. I mean, I'm out there watching. You're watching different guys be contributors every night. Stankoven's been really good for them. Taylor Hall's been kind of an underrated pickup for them because
That's
you don't hear his name every
crazy.
night, but he's been good. And then you still lean on the big guys, right? You still lean on Aho and Svechnikov, and like Svechnikov gets the goal that puts him into the second, into the conference final.
He's leading the team. He's got 8 goals through 2 rounds, and they've only played 10 games.
Yeah, it's so.
Is that good?
It's and I'm like, obviously, I'm still going to stick to my guns from preseason. I'll pick Florida in 7, but you know my Game 7 rule, and Game 7, by the way, is going to be in Carolina. So
yes, and
that's something to consider.
Yeah, and I will say, I know I mentioned on our last show when we were doing our Edmonton Vegas preview that the home ice advantage in the Game 7 was really what kind of tipped me over the edge for Vegas. Both crowds are good. Obviously, I'm not taking anything away from them, especially this deep into the playoffs. But it's not the same. I don't think either one of these teams have that home arena aura that makes Game 7 an unbeatable, dungeon. I do think Carolina wins this game. I have consistently been predicting the Panthers gas tank finally running empty, and maybe they'll continue to prove me wrong because Matthew Tkachuk's a monster. But I do have Carolina winning this one, and I'll say they take it in 6. I think the clock finally runs out for Florida.
Okay.
Yeah. And then with that, we move to the West, and man, the Dallas Stars have played in 2 Stanley Cup final series already. And this is another one, man. Like
2 conference finals, you mean, at least, because we'll keep them on the same side. But playing Colorado and Winnipeg,
you know what I mean? Stanley Cup caliber series. Like if Dallas wins the cup this year, I think there's a real argument that it is one of the tougher roads to the cup in recent years. Like they did not have an easy series at any step along the way, no matter who they face in the next round, should they get there. That being said, Edmonton has had a couple of days off. I don't think it is as good for them as it was for the Carolina Hurricanes. When Connor McDavid's hot, the last thing you want to do is stop playing. This one's tough, man. I do not know. I will give my prediction here first, just so I can throw to you. But
okay,
man, it's definitely going 7. I do have this one as a 7 gamer.
Yep, so do I.
So I have my preseason prediction with with the Dallas Stars, but then on the other side is Connor McDavid. And like I feel really uncomfortable sitting here and saying into a camera that Connor McDavid is going to lose. But I do have the Dallas Stars taking this one in 7.
So do I.
Okay.
And that doesn't mean that I wouldn't be surprised if it's McDavid and the Oilers again.
Of course.
Look, I still keep waiting for the goaltending thing to turn back into a pumpkin for the Oilers here because it's been really good. Obviously, you've got one of the things, and here's the thing that's interesting because I actually put that out there kind of while watching Dallas Winnipeg Game 6, which was you don't really need to be the team that says I have an elite goaltender and you can to win the Stanley Cup. You don't need to be that team. What you do need is
that in recent years.
What you do need is to have a pretty good goalie who plays elite for like 6 weeks.
Jordan Binnington 2019.
I mean, you can take your pick. Aiden Hill, playing for Vegas, looking outstanding for 6 weeks. And I'm not saying he's a bad goalie, but he's a pretty good goalie most of the year. And then you ramp it up in playoffs. To a degree, you're seeing that now with Freddie Anderson. You're seeing that with you're seeing that across the board here. There's times where that's Sergei Bobrovsky, even though Bobrovsky's been in the elite category. There are times where it's,
Of
you
course.
take it to another level when it's time. But what I countered that with is, you don't need the elite goalie, but it sure is nice to have either Jake Ottinger or Connor Hellebuck.
Man, is Jake Ottinger good or is Jake Ottinger good?
Um,
Holy.
Listen, I don't know. It won't be. It's not this year, obviously, because we're past the point. Like the finalists are already out, so it won't be this year. It will be sometime soon that Jake Ottinger wins a Vezina. It's coming.
Oh, and Connor Hellebuck might still start for Team USA in 26. I can tell you right now, 30 is Ottinger's for sure.
Well, and somebody might have something to say about what you just said.
Fair enough.
And it's Jake Ottinger, who kind of already, as people said, in a breath of fresh air kind of moment, flat out said, "I want to be the starter in the Olympics." Just said it.
I love that.
And I love that too. I've always liked him, and if he keeps feeling like more and more he's coming into it's his time mode, like, and it's and I'm going to tell you something. We're going to revisit this pending the result of this series in the Cup final.
Of course.
If they can make it to the Cup final first and then potentially win the thing, and Ottinger still is at the age that he is, and so are some of those other core pieces, I'd be sweating if I was the rest of the league over that one, because this doesn't feel like a one-time thing if that happens now. I mean, let's put it this way, didn't it feel the same way with Florida a little bit, where it's like, oh wait, Matthew Tkachuk's not that old, and they've got some other guys that are starting to fall into their own a little bit. The real question was Bob. Bob was on the older side, and that's what you question. You got the same thing with, and if Edmonton makes another Cup final, you got the same argument, because McDavid and Draisaitl still aren't on the other side of 30.
Right.
And
they were just there last year, pushed it as far as they could.
And your number one defenseman is like 25, I think. Bouchard's like 25, and you've got all these other pieces that seem to really work or whatever.
And frankly, McDavid, Draisaitl, and Bouchard are so good that you can be flexible on the pieces around them in a similar way to how the Boston Bruins just put 15 years on Bergeron, Krejci, Chara.
Now imagine if you weren't going back and forth between goalies in the playoffs.
Yep.
Seriously, imagine if that team had a stable goalie.
Imagine if Stuart Skinner stayed in his net and Leon Draisaitl didn't tip the puck in. They would have swept the Vegas Golden Knights.
Yeah, no kidding.
How crazy is that to say?
Yeah, and you know what? Here's how right you are about that. I was they had tied the game at that point. I'm like, they're gonna win this thing in overtime, and it never got to overtime by less than a second.
Right. Exactly.
So, but I'm sticking with. To be honest with you, I didn't think I was going to get this far with both teams still on the table. So I'm taking that for what it's worth and surprised by it, and being not surprised, because I thought that was what was going to happen. But I'm going to run that until it's over.
Pleasantly surprised that your predictions are coming through.
But I'm going to tell you right now, we got to it's more the last one than this one. Like, this one is tough. I really thought about switching my pick from Florida to Carolina.
Yeah, Carolina has.
And hey, listen, I mean, if it goes the other direction, then the two teams that kind of everybody seemed to have pegged to be at the beginning of the year, you might get a rematch of 2006.
See, and I was just going to mention, I think the matchup that I want to see most, just from a personnel standpoint, is I want to see Connor McDavid against the Carolina Hurricanes for 7 games.
You just want Rod in there.
No, dude, because that is unstoppable force, immovable object, and I want to see who wins.
Yeah. Oh, I hear you.
And yeah, man, I want to see Rod threaten to bench press Leon Draisaitl. Yeah, I do.
I by the way, I think your conversation from the last 2 shows is out the window at this point.
Yeah, I know. That's another reason I was hoping Washington would just smoke them in the second round. But no, I'm happy for Rod, and I hope he gets to take another picture with that cup. But
that'd be cool.
Yeah. But all right.
Yeah, we'll see.
I think that's a pretty good spot to put a pin in our playoff discussion here. We will be returning sometime between the conclusion of the Stanley Cup final and the NHL draft. So we will have a draft.
I thought before that we're doing the between the conference final and the cup final first, right?
Oh, wow. Man, I have skipped forward already. I have completely missed a show. Yes. We will be back in just a couple of weeks after the conference final with a little bit of
Yeah.
a preview for the cup. Probably won't be a whole lot of Flyers news at this point. You have a coach, so unless there's a trade, and that would be very unusual,
They did
probably.
the trade with LA, or the 3-team trade with Provorov and all that. That happened during the
That's
cup
true.
final a couple of years back. So
That
it's
is true.
never out of the question with Danny Briere.
Right. That is true. That man is active. He's signing Rodrigo Abels. So that
That's true. Hey, that was a piece
he
of news I didn't bother to bring up.
yeah, one
Sorry.
Rodrigo Abels is back 1 year. Okay, that's it.
Rodrigo's a good dude. I feel bad that I
Yeah,
missed that for a second. He was a good dude to be around for a little bit.
absolutely.
No, we'll see. I mean, there's RFAs that they could sign also. I wonder.
Fair.
That's this way. You got to give props to Tyson Forster playing in World Championships right now and holding his own on a line. Didn't he play on? Saw he played on a line today with McKinnon and oh god.
He's been spending time with all the big
Well,
guys.
Konechny's playing with Crosby and Celebrini, which is
Yep.
kind of sick to say.
Which is kind of the standout line out of Team Canada at this
Right,
event.
but then Forster was on a line with like certainly McKinnon. I remember seeing McKinnon's name, and you're just thinking, this is real life. They stacked him with him.
I'm glad he's getting in there and getting playing time because the first kind of lineup I saw had him as the 13th forward. So I'm glad he got his way in there and he's getting.
Well, he went out there, he put up some points. He's doing everything that everybody liked him doing in the first place, and I think he's turning heads.
Yep. And listen, I know we've talked about the Olympics a little bit here, and it's been said before that by Team Canada that if you want to be considered for the Olympics, you got to do things like show up to the World Championships.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the 2026 roster is probably spoken for. I don't necessarily think Tyson Forster is getting that call, but he's setting himself up for maybe 30 when Sid's retired. And a bunch of these other guys, like a lot of that Team Canada team is getting a little older and may not be around in 30. And Tyson Forster wants himself in the conversation. And I love that for him.
Well, and speaking of which, because that goes back to Four Nations too, Konechny and Sanheim playing in Four Nations, one of the assistant coaches for Team Canada was Rick Tocchet. And both of them seemed to be like, hey, this was good. He was good to work with. This was fun. That was fun. Let's take it into the real situation now. Let's take it into the regular season. So it helps that there's somebody who can kind of go off of, I know what it's like slightly and play
a little bit of familiarity always goes a long way. So,
but it feels weird to be doing this on a night when there's not a game on. So let's hope that tomorrow arrives quickly.
The good news for us sitting here recording is that the conference finals start tomorrow.
Yep.
If you're listening to this, they probably start tonight. So, all right. We wanted to thank you for coming in, checking out You Would Think this week. Make sure you're following us on social media. We're at YWT Podcast. Kevin is at Kevin_Durso everywhere except Blue Sky, where it's just at Kevin Durso. You can find your podcast everywhere. You can find this show everywhere you find your podcast, including sportstalkphilly.com. Subscribe to the YouTube channel. Hit the like button over there. It helps us out. And until then, probably not a whole lot of Flyers news, but we are getting some real high quality hockey. So until then, we'll see you.